The lower Baker Dam, which is behind it, is the reservoir, which is Lake Shannon. And Lower Baker Dam was built in 1925. The Upper Baker Dam, that was completed in 1959. So it's a newer dam, it's a larger dam, and Baker Lake is the reservoir that is behind the Upper Baker Dam. So, I see you guys are taking notes. So for me as a fisheries biologist, my job is to make sure that we have safe fish passage upstream and downstream. So the Lower Baker Dam is 285 feet high. And when that was built in 1925, there weren't that many dams at that point. There weren't any fish ladders, and even today, fish ladders that go up that high is uncommon. You see that in low head dams, but like on the Snake and the Columbia River, but 285 foot is too high for fish ladders. So what they did at that time is they built a short little fish ladder, and then the fish went into a hopper, and then the hopper would be lifted by an 800-foot cable tram all the way up to the top of the Lower Baker Dam, and it would release those fish into the reservoir. And then those fish, mostly sockeye and coho and all the other 5 Pacific salmon species, those would be released in the lake. They would swim up the reservoir, continue all the way up the Baker River, up to the old historic Baker Lake. That Baker Lake, if you look in the relief map there, it's on the upper part of Baker Lake there. And that 1 square mile lake, that was native ground for sockeye. Sockeye is a species that, not always, but in most cases, relies on a lake environment for the juveniles to feed on zooplankton, which are swimming in the lake. And so the Baker sockeye population is native to that Baker Lake. So in 1959, actually it was in 58, when they knew they were building the Upper Baker Dam, they did not want to build another fish ladder or cable tram or anything to get fish that they had put into Lake Shannon to then go up one more dam to get to the upper part of the reservoir. So at that point, they built, in 1958, in preparation for that, they built the upstream fish trap. So here at the site is the trap, and we're going to walk out there and you'll look at it. But it's the upstream fish trap, which is a trap and haul facility. So fish that are captured here, that are on their way up the Baker system, those fish are caught at the trap. We load them onto a truck, and then they are driven around Lake Shannon and released up into Baker Lake, or they're released at our hatchery. So last year, we had over 28,000 sockeye come back to the trap. We had a record of over 48,000 total sockeye that returned to the river. So we have a tribal fishery. We don't, but the tribes have a net fishery, and they intercepted quite a few of those sockeye before they made it to the trap. There was also that year was a sport fishery in the river. And of course the sockeye that we do capture and we're bringing to the lake, because the numbers have increased quite a bit, we now have a sport fishery in Baker Lake. So if is pretty popular. So it's becoming more popular now, and it's open right now. So people fish for these sockeye in Baker Lake. The improvements that we made, we got a new license in 2008, and we're going to be going up and we'll take a look at for downstream migrants, we'll take a look at the floating surface collector, which is a state-of-the-art facility, which is basically a big barge, which we collect the juvenile fish as they're migrating out of the reservoirs. And that facility has really helped to improve out-migration, which has ultimately helped with the number of adult sockeye returning. So, with the new license in 2008, we had agreed to upgrade our trap. So when we go out there and take a look at the upstream fish trap, we made improvements in 2010. So the trap has been changed, and I'll describe it out there, but it has a lock, and it makes it a lot more efficient, and it's easier for us to be able to haul fish and capture fish and haul them up to Baker. And the other thing, I might as well tell you now since I kind of have you wrapped in here, is we also are breaking records this year. So for downstream migrants, mostly sockeye, we installed for 2013 a duplicate of what we have in Baker Lake. So we have a floating surface collector that captures juvenile fish. We built another one for Lake Shannon. And knowing that that was going to be put in place, our hatchery, we produced sockeye and put fry in the lake, and they reared for a year, and we got them this year. So the records we broke this year for juvenile migration is we have over 200,000 total fish, most of which are sockeye, that we collected our brand new state-of-the-art floating surface collector in Lake Shannon, which is similar to the one we have in Baker Lake. So this year, let's say last year, we were very proud that we broke records and had numbers of 464,000 juvenile fish that we collected at our facility for downstream migrants. This year in 2013, we're at the end of the season. It's still in operation. We're still collecting fish, but not that many. But we have over 825,000 smolts that we have collected, and we're transporting downriver. So think of last year's record, which we were very proud of, 464,000, now 825,000. So what does that mean? It means that with the number of smolts that we are collecting this year, they go out to sea. They generally spend 2 winters out in the ocean, and then they come back as adults. And if ocean conditions are good, which they have been good, there's a potential to get up to 10% smolt to adult return. So these juvenile fish are migrating out, those we call smolts, and when they return 2 years later, they're adults. And if we get 10% return and we have 80,000 of these juvenile fish that we have collected and sent out, we could get 80,000 adults. That's huge. So at 48,000 last year, we have about 9,000 this year so far, and we're at the peak of the sockeye migration, adult return. So it's a good story, and it's something that Puget Sound excuse me. It's something Puget Sound Energy has done a lot of work and spent a lot of money to do, but but it's really improved the fish population here. Questions?
Does the trap and haul process replace the cable tram thing that you were talking about?
Yeah, in 1958, that's when they started upgrading and built, rather, the trap. So that's when they installed the trap and haul system, and it's been that way since the late 50s. And the upgrade that we had, which you'll see, is upgrades that were done in 2010. We have a new hatchery that was rebuilt, and you'll see that. We rebuilt that in 2010 as part of our new license mitigation. And so we made, it's a state-of-the-art hatchery facility. And so you'll see that, and you'll see what we do there. Any other questions?
You said so far 90,000 this year? Was that last year? For returning?
For returning, we have 9,000 so far.
9,000.
Yeah,
sorry.
that have come to the trap. And
Okay.
they also, keep in mind that they had a gillnet fishery, the tribes did, and I'm not sure, I don't have a total number that they've caught, but I think that a minimum of probably 5,000 that they've caught. So you take the 9,000 we've collected at the trap, plus the 5,000 or more that they caught in their net fishery. So right now we're at least 14,000, and we have plenty to go. The estimate is, they figure, is maybe 21,000 adult return this year. It's smaller this year compared to last year because we have less juvenile fish that we collected a couple years ago. So we expected to be a little bit lower sockeye adult return. But it's in future years where we're looking at these large numbers of sockeye that we sent out. It's going to translate into much larger sockeye adult returns. So it's real positive for the tribes. It's positive for sportsmen, and it looks good for PSE too.
So was last year your greatest return so far?
Yeah.
You're saying it's increasing?
Yeah. Now keep in mind that in 1985 we only had 99 sockeye adults return. And we were at the verge of losing the whole sockeye population. So it was crisis mode at that point. And so that's when, that was just before my time, but that's right when they first started putting effort into improving the systems and seeing what they needed to do to try to bring the population back from the brink. So 99 fish in 85, 48,000 last year. So that's a big improvement in for sockeye.
How much electricity do these two dams make?
The almost 200 megawatts.
Is that in comparison to, like, let's say, like one of the Colombian dams over there?
Much smaller.
Yeah.
You know, some of the larger dams, I think they get, I think they can get 600 to 1,000 megawatts. You know, they're pretty big, and those are big, large river. You know, the Columbia. But with the Upper Baker and Lower Baker Dam, something to add is that at Lower Baker, as one of our final capital projects as part of our mitigation for our license, we had to build Powerhouse 4. So Powerhouse 3 is at Lower Baker, and that one I think runs about, I don't know if you want to write this down, but I think it's 80 some megawatts. And they built a 30 megawatt unit there at the, you can't go visit it right now because they're still doing work on it. But what that does and this is something that when it comes to environmental type stuff, assuming that you guys are learning about that kind of stuff. That new unit is important because not only it provides power, but it also, it's a smaller unit, but it also provides in-stream flow, which is one of our requirements with our new license. Is we don't want to strand juvenile fish that may be migrating down, let's say Chinook that are small fry, that are moving on downstream. By putting in that small unit, when they ramp down, meaning that they're having full power and they're flowing a lot of water, when they start closing down the wicket gates, which reduces the amount of water going through the turbine, it reaches a point where at about 2,000 megawatts, or 2,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, it starts to cavitate, and they have to drop it fairly quick. That causes the stage of the river to drop. That can strand fish in the river. So that unit will offset that stage by keeping the flow going when they bring it through that rough zone. So it's helpful for maintaining 1,000 CFS in the river instead of the leakage going through the dam if they're not generating, and it also provides the deals with the ramping to limit the amount of ramping.
Some of us have seen the videos on the dam removal at the Elwha.
Mm-hmm.
There were tremendous amounts of sediment impounded behind the dams. Since Lake Shannon, since the dam, the lower dam's been up there since 1925, do you have a problem with sediment impoundment? How do you deal with it? Is there...
That's a good question. At Upper Baker, when you look at depth measurements that are taken in the reservoir, the majority of the deposition of sediment occurs in the upper end of the reservoir. So when the Baker River flows into the reservoir, large of the fines, those are able to stay suspended and make it all the way down, and mostly some settle out, but some go on through into the lower reservoir. But the majority of the larger sediment, that settles out when the Baker River first flows in the upper end of the Baker Reservoir. So when they bring this reservoir, both of them can actually drop down and ramp down to 50 feet. So that exposes a lot of the shoreline. It exposes many of the stumps, the trees that were there, and those are not all inundated and covered. So a lot of the sediment, there's fine sediments around the roots of the stumps, but the majority of that is on the upper end. So there's not what you hear in some rivers and some dams where the sediment builds up all behind it and all of a sudden it's not even useful anymore. That would be the case like Elwha, is if you remove the dams, brought it down to just river flow, you'd have a lot of scouring and some of the stuff on the upper end, that would have to redistribute downstream.
I've seen it from the campgrounds up there. I know what you mean, how much gets impounded back there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one right here. You have an estimate about how many fish the population is lost because of the dam? A recent estimate?
The question, how many, I'm thinking the way you're asking the question is, what was the historic population? And
No,
with the dams, how was that population affected originally? Or what? Say it again.
No,
please.
more like, as of today, because of the dam, the upper and the lower, how many fish die because of the dam being here?
So how many fish die? What effect does the dams have on the populations? What I would say is that prior to the guide nets that we have for juvenile fish, any fish that were produced and migrated out of the reservoirs, at Lower Baker, when they first built it in 1925, I talked about they had a tramway for bringing adult fish up. There was nothing for downstream migrants. When juvenile fish, sockeye, coho, all the other species, when those fish were moving downstream, when they came down to the Lower Baker Dam, let's say 1928, 1930, 1940, the only way for juvenile fish to get past the dam, migrating downstream, they had to go through the turbine, and you'd lose about 50%, studies have shown. Or they would, at certain times of the year when the reservoir was up at the highest, they would open a spill gate, and the fish would go down the dam face, 285 feet down to the bottom. And they have even higher loss from that. So that had a big impact on the survival of juvenile fish. The reservoirs themselves and the fish that were in the tributary streams, they were fine there until they wanted to get past the dam. So it was when they built the Upper Baker Dam, that's when they built the gulpers, they called them, which were a barge pump water, and it simulated an outgoing stream. That's when they started having a method for getting juvenile fish out. So, big improvements, period of time with not a good system.
Real quick question. So do you have all the species of Pacific salmon come up the Baker, or do some of them just miss the Baker River? They all come up the Baker River?
We get all 5 Pacific salmon that in the Skagit come to our trap.
Okay, so they are coming up the river.
But not all of them are sent upstream.
Okay.
Chum, for instance, those are returned back to the Skagit River, and they spawn along the along the river shore. There's spots that they're better suited. Chinook, those are mostly put back into the Skagit River. They're kind of deeper, faster water spawners, so they're better off being in the Skagit. And these are decisions that are made by co-managers, the tribes, the state, the feds,
Okay.
on what to do with these species. So some fish we put back.
Okay. And traditionally, though, that would be their traditional spawning grounds, which were up here.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So that's why they're coming up, but then they get put back.
Today they're mostly just strays coming in,
Okay.
because they didn't originate from here.
Okay.
But historically, pre-dam, all the species that you see in the wall there, they all moved up this system.
And you were mentioning, I think originating from Zach's question, historically, prior to the dams, what kind of a difference in numbers are you looking at for production now compared to pre-dam production of salmon?
I wish I could answer that. There's what they call the Kimmerer report. It's a pre-dam. It was late 1890s. That was at a point where harvest really started increasing, and you hear about and you read about all along the down to California, up in this area. They have canneries. You hear about Cannery Row down in California, and at that point they already knew that there was an impact on natural populations, and they decided that, hey, there's a sockeye population. They wanted to put a hatchery up there. So they had donkeys, and they brought stuff up trails and put an old hatchery up in the old original lake. But it was only 1 square mile. And even though it was, I'm sure, very productive, you could only produce so many out of there. The old hatchery, they lost some of the records. There was fires. They don't know for sure what the actual numbers were, but they have numbers that are up to 20,000. So I'm sure that there was, a historic population of 20,000, maybe more. But but probably not 85,000 that we're able to produce now with bigger reservoirs and all our systems to be able to get them down. But yeah, there was a historic population, and then in 1985 with only 99 sockeye adults, the dams themselves had a huge impact on natural populations until the efforts that have been put in recent years.
What type of chemical, because I know this was a long time ago, and I'm sure that was a little hard to find, but for like the upper dam, what type of chemical changes were found after it was dammed up, like between lake and river?
I have never seen any limnology reports, lake chemistry for the old original Baker Lake. The Lake Shannon, if just to look at that regard, Baker Lake's a little bit colder, a little less productive than Lake Shannon, and that's something that we're actually excited about because we've never really used Lake Shannon as a rearing environment for juvenile fish. And with our new hatchery, we put 2 million the year before last. We put 1.3 million into Lake Shannon. These are sockeye fry, and it's more productive. It's a little warmer. It's a little more nutrients. The trap this year we have it, and we're seeing a lot of Daphnia, which is the primary food source for sockeye. So, but as far as other than temperature and nutrient availability, other chemistry, I wouldn't say.
So Lake Shannon's a little more productive than Baker Lake. So your hatchery on Baker Lake, do you have more mortality, or is it less, I guess, productive in a way? So.
Let's begin with you.
Yeah.
Our hatchery, it sits right below, we're going to see it, but it sits right below the Upper Baker Dam, and we have low mortality from this system with the trap and haul. Adults coming back, we don't have problems with like pre-spawn mortality and the fish that we release in the reservoir. I mean, we don't have loss there. Juvenile fish, like any hatchery, you're going to on occasion you could get some disease that you have to treat, but we have low mortality in our hatchery, and we have good survival of fish that we rear and release into the reservoirs. We mark them and then recapture them, and we have good overwinter survival. So.
One more quick question.
Okay. We could be here all day.
The pink salmon, the humpies.
Yeah.
They're starting to return right now.
Yeah.
Do you have projected numbers of how many are coming back up the Skagit? Do you know that number, or is it just returning here into your trap? Do you have any projected numbers?
So pink salmon, those are odd year fish. They are coming back this year, being 2013. The policy is if they come to the trap, we bring them upstream. Pink salmon, they spawn and the fry, they're like 90-day wonders. They go out as fry, right? They don't stick around in the reservoir. We don't have, when they first come through, we've seen pink salmon fry move through our reservoir and out through our traps. But the population in recent years has been so strong, and it's supposed to be a good year this year too. They aren't concerned. The agencies kind of view it as nutrient enhancement. So pink salmon that are moved upstream, yeah, some of them will spawn. The fry won't make it out. So, but that's not a problem because the river is just littered with pink salmon.
Okay, so there's a lot.
There's a lot. We don't usually get a lot of strays because they're not coming from here. They're not imprinting.
Okay.
They're kind of straying in. 1993, I think we had 5,000. But usually we get, a couple hundreds or so. but not large numbers. Out of the million or whatever that's out there,
Oh, okay, so.
we don't get a huge number in our trap,
Okay,
because they'd just be spraying in here.
okay.